Hi everyone, this video is a discussion of Congressman Ron Paul's new book, The Great Surreptitious Coup, Who Stole Western Civilization? Congressman Paul was a congressman for many decades, a doctor, and a 3 times presidential candidate. That's how I heard about him. And he's also, as it turns out, he's also a huge conspiracy theorist. And if he's a conspiracy theorist, then call me a conspiracy theorist, because I love this man, I believe this man. I heard about this book when Dr. Paul went on the Timcast podcast, the Tim Pool show. And guys, if you have Congressman Ron Paul in your show, and he says that the CIA assassinated JFK, RFK, and MLK, word to the wise, don't immediately change the subject to your stoner talk. Okay, that's not good interviewing practices. Let him keep expounding on the topic. When he said that, I just had to go and get this book. Now, if you're listening to this video, you probably haven't read this book because it's a very limited edition book. It's not available on Amazon anymore. You can only get it if you donate like $50 to the Ron Paul Institute. So I encourage everybody to go and do that. It's a tiny little book. It's kind of like a commemorative thing where if you donate to it, they'll give you back a book. And it doesn't disappoint. Now, I was skeptical that this book would actually, deliver. I mean, what? Dr. Paul's going to prove inconclusively that the CIA assassinated JFK, like in this tiny little commemorative book? But the fact of the matter is he doesn't need to do that because so many other people have written about the JFK assassination before him, hours and hours, exhaustively looking at every aspect of this. He acts as a curator, curating all the books he's read, all the hours he spent researching this, and he gives you the chink in the armor, the most suspicious aspects of the JFK assassination. For example, Mary Myers, or Alan Dulles being put in the Warren Commission. In the spirit of full disclosure, I have mixed feelings about conspiracy theory books. I consider myself a skeptic, and I take pride in the fact that I question the stuff that I hear, and I don't believe every conspiracy theory I hear. On the other hand, I love a good conspiracy theory. In the Sherlock Holmes series, I just love the Professor Moriarty arc. I can just imagine Arthur Conan Doyle writing this character, Sherlock Holmes, who is like Superman, a genius, and he wanted to kill him off. So he was like, well, I have to write an evil genius who's up to par to the good guy. So he wrote this character of Professor Moriarty. And so just as Sherlock Holmes is good, Professor Moriarty was evil and powerful. And I just love this scene with, all the newspaper clippings on the wall connected by yarn, all pointing to one character. The idea that Sherlock Holmes could just sit in a room concentrating without any distractions and just think and use logic and use a priori logic and deduce that every evil in London was created by one guy, revealing this huge conspiracy theory. I just love that. I find it fascinating. And I think that, we believe we live in this menial 9-to-5 world where we just mow our lawns and do stuff like that. But if you sit like Sherlock Holmes and you just think about it and you think things through, you're going to uncover conspiracy theories. Okay, there's a few that I've come around with. For example, the USS Liberty, that didn't even need to be a conspiracy theory. It was just Lyndon Johnson covering up an embarrassment. It's not even a conspiracy theory. Okay, the other one is the lab leak theory. I mean, people have been completely vindicated, and like the president once said, if you're a smart person, you can figure it out. And it's true. The evidence can all be deduced a priori. The other one that is very shady is Jeffrey Epstein. I can't say anything conclusively because I haven't researched it, to be honest, but that's one that's very, very shady. So I like this book by Dr. Paul because it gives me, the references and the starting off point. I am going to research the JFK assassination, and I encourage you to research it yourself, but I like this book because it gives you a good starting point. Now, throughout the book, Dr. Paul sprinkles little details, little hints here and there, telling you what conspiracy theories he believes in. For example, in one of the parts he says, this coup, this surreptitious coup, started 125 years ago. And so then you go and you are like, okay, 2023 minus 125. Oh, okay, that's 1898. What happened in 1998? Well, the Spanish-American War happened. And in another part, he explicitly says the Spanish-American War was a conspiracy. Stuff like that. But the main thesis of the book, the main message he's trying to get across, is that Western civilization and everything that Western civilization has brought is under attack and being destroyed by nihilism, nihilists, people who believe there's no such thing as good and evil, people who believe there's no such thing as a higher law. This country was founded on Christianity. This country was founded on a higher law. To go on a little bit of a tangent here, stuff that's not mentioned in this specific book. Ann Coulter has a great thing about this. The idea that if we look at the Haitian Revolution, where the Haitians put the heads of the French in spikes, babies, women, and children, their heads on pikes, or the French Revolution, where you had cannibalism, you had the guillotine, you had Robespierre decapitating people and then him getting decapitated, and rapes and murders. Those revolutions were really different from the American Revolution. The French have the guillotine, we have the Liberty Bell. Why is that? Because the American Revolution was a Christian revolution. Everybody was Christian. This country was founded by Christianity. All the founding fathers were Christians. The meeting halls were churches. Okay, preachers would preach an argument for independence. This was a Christian movement. This country was based on Christian values, the Sermon on the Mount, the Ten Commandments, the idea of a higher law. Ayn Rand, who hated Christianity and hated all religion, ardently fought against nihilism. That was like her number one target, was people who believed that there's no such thing as an objective truth or good and evil, and there's no, or that there is good and evil, but it's unknowable to us. So why did Dr. Paul blame everything on nihilists? Well, because if you believe in this idea that you can commit evil for the greater good, or that there is no such thing as greater good, well, then in that kind of a world, then you can assassinate a president. In that kind of a world, you can do evil things like completely disregard the Constitution or perform double mastectomies on teenagers because it's all relative, right? That's the thing they have in common. And in fact, Dr. Paul states explicitly that there is no real conspiracy group per se. It's not, the people who did the Spanish-American War, who planned the Spanish-American War, were not the same people who assassinated JFK or later imposed the COVID restrictions. It's not the same cabal. But the thing they all have in common is that they hate Western civilization and what it was founded on. The idea that there is good and evil, and it can be knowable, and there is a higher law. Okay, so let's list some of the conspiracies that Dr. Paul mentions in his book. All right, so a contrived war with Spain, so the Spanish-American War. Passage of the income tax, that was a conspiracy. Establishment of the IRS, that was a conspiracy. The creation of the Federal Reserve. Woodrow Wilson's foreign policy, which put us into World War I. And FDR's policy, which got us into World War II. Those were all conspiracies. He also mentions Truman's and Roosevelt's need to control world affairs. He says between 1946 and the year 2000, the U.S. led 81 coups in different countries. Okay, the more memorable ones that he emphasizes is the 1953 coup that put the Shah of Iran in power, which was 100% about oil and U.S. empire. The other one that he mentions is the coup we did in 2014 in Ukraine. He says the operation was wrongly called Revolution of Dignity, but should have been called NATO's war against Russia. he points out that by 1975, we knew of surveillance of political and civil rights organizations, assassinations of foreign leaders, and systemic interference of foreign and domestic news organizations. Back then, it was fear about communism, but now it's fear about COVID and Chinese balloons. FISA courts were set up to prevent unreasonable searches and seizures, but that effort ended up with FISA and the FBI just colluding. We know that Congress members were targeted for surveillance by the FBI, and they probably have continued to be surveilled. And after the Church Committee banned all torture forever, an estimated 50 secret black prisons in 28 different countries have continued to operate, some of them torturing. And the problem with all of this is that all these unconstitutional practices that are directed outward end up being used against the U.S. population, against us. Okay? The culmination was during the Obama administration when Anwar al-Awlaki, a U.S. citizen, was assassinated, and his son, by the way. Of course, when we assassinated Soleimani, Dr. Paul isn't happy about that either. He doesn't cut Trump any slack when he did that. He called it a very undiplomatic and needless assassination. The most recent example of these unconstitutional practices being used against United States citizens is obviously the January 6th entrapment. Okay, Dr. Paul points out we have evidence that the FBI was involved in the meandering of January 6th. You know, these government agencies, the CIA, the FBI, and the IRS are used by whatever political party is in charge. That's what Dr. Paul said in the book. You know, whichever political party is in charge uses them as a strong arm. We have Russiagate. We have the denial of the 2016 election. Okay, we have the collusion, all the Twitter files, the collusion between social media and real media and government agencies to censor people. Also, all this COVID propaganda that was used. Dr. Paul, in one of the parts of the book, says we won't have real freedom of speech in this country unless we abolish the FBI. Why? Because the FBI punishes or rewards propaganda. And he mentions in another part of the book, that's why the founders didn't like pure democracies, by the way. Because, as we can see, people are very susceptible to propaganda, TikTok, to all that kind of stuff. So that's why they added the checks and balances. And nowhere did they say they liked pure democracy, because it's flawed, and they knew that back then. But I like the last, at one point, Dr. Paul says, before it was harder to see the members of the coup that took over this country, the people who are trying to do away with Western civilization and destroy Western civilization. But now we can see them more clearly. Now their veil has fallen, and we can see their faces. And the example he uses for that is the sexual mutilation of children. These people are out in the open. So to wrap up the video, let's talk about some of the other points that Dr. Paul mentions about the JFK assassination. Okay, so you've heard a lot of people say, JFK was assassinated because he tried to end the Fed, or because he tried to do this, or because he tried to do that, because he gave a speech prior to being assassinated where he explained his intentions to end the Fed, stuff like that. And Dr. Paul submits something similar to that. It's called the peace speech that Kennedy gave about 5 months before being assassinated. If you present a hindrance to the war industrial complex, they might assassinate you. If we really had a president who wanted to actually end the wars, and Dr. Paul mentions that LBJ might have been a conspirator. Some people believe that. What did LBJ do? He expanded the Vietnam War, to a huge extent. I mean, that was why he said, if elected, I won't accept, and if I run, I won't do this or that. He didn't run for re-election because of his bad, horrible record with the Vietnam War and expanding it. And then we have all the stuff in the 60s happened after 1963 when JFK was assassinated. So all the Cold War, all of our expansion stuff, Dr. Paul submits that John F. Kennedy truly wanted to bring about peace, and that is why he was assassinated. Signing the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty did not play in his favor. I mean, the co-conspirators of the assassination did not like that. They did not like the speech. Some people say Alan Dulles was the orchestrator of the assassination. He fired Alan Dulles, the former CIA director. So, and he was put in the Warren Commission to investigate it. And some people say that the Warren report is clearly, if you read it, it's clearly a cover-up. It makes no attempt to actually find the truth. Another point that Dr. Paul makes is that it's estimated that over 100 people associated in some way with the assassination, the investigation with JFK, have died under suspicious circumstances. Now, when people say that about the Clintons, I don't really buy that when they say that about the Clintons, because the Clintons have been involved in politics for, 50, 60 years. So if you meet thousands of people, of course some of them are going to end up, committing suicide with 2 bullets. But I do think that about the Clintons. I don't know about this. Like I said, this is a starting point for me to research this and, make up your own mind. He says the most suspicious death, though, was Mary Picon Myers, the mistress of John F. Kennedy. They have love letters between each other. And another guy, a guy wrote a very interesting book about it, which I haven't read, but I've seen his summary, and I'm interested in maybe doing a future video about it. But supposedly she was getting too close to the truth. She was, based on her diary entries, they would talk about, the CIA or peace. I don't know. She ended up extrapolating the involvement of the CIA, and she ended up dying under very, very suspicious. It's still a mystery from my understanding. Another interesting little tidbit that Dr. Paul mentions in the book is 5 months after the assassination of JFK, Truman, who signed the CIA into law, created it, wrote an op-ed to the Washington Post arguing that we should limit the role of the CIA to just intelligence gathering. Did he know something? I've heard from other sources that Nixon would allude in private about the CIA involvement. So it's just a very interesting topic, I think, that warrants more research. And that's why I recommend this book highly. So that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a sense of that. I was truly fascinated by Dr. Paul's perspectives and his knowledge. And in terms of the next videos coming up, I wrote a video about The Virtue of Selfishness by Ayn Rand, which is a treasure trove. That book, that woman was a genius, and that book truly made a huge impression on me, and it goes under the radar. People don't realize what a great book that is. It's very tiny, but I wrote it. Took me many hours, wrote a huge script. It would be like a couple hours long if I did it. And I started listening to it. I started actually recording it, and it was super boring. And I was like, I can't finish this because it's so boring. Nobody's going to watch the video. So I need to touch that up still. And besides that, I have so many plans. Like, it's crazy. I think I'm afraid I have like bipolar. I'm not bipolar, by the way, but I'm afraid I am because I'm so excited about these other ones and I get all hyper to make them and then I never make them. But like, The Prince, that book just blew my mind. And making a video comparing and contrasting it with the biography of John Quincy Adams, the guy who should have read The Prince but didn't, or maybe he did and he didn't follow it. I don't know. Another one comparing the Book of Mormon with Robinson Crusoe and the Chronicles of Narnia. That would be a video I want to make in the works. Another one comparing and contrasting two books that blew my mind, which was 1984 and Brave New World. Two great amazing books. Yeah, so if you want to be notified when those videos come up, if they ever come up, I'm sorry, but, subscribe. And if nothing else, thank you for watching.